welcome to Creature Modeling for Games in Maya. I'm Justin Marshall, and over the next few hours, we'll go through the process of creating a creature model for use in real-time applications like video games. We'll do this using the concept sculpt created in the previous course. We'll start by learning to output a highly detailed version of our sculpt that can be used to bake maps and create new geometry. We'll then learn to use several methods in Maya and ZBrush to create more game-optimized pieces of geometry. We will retopologize our meshes using Maya to get pieces that will run in real time and are suitable for receiving baked normal maps. We'll make sure our geometry has UVs so those maps can be baked and textures can be created in Substance Painter in the next course. If you've gone through the previous course, feel free to use your own concept sculpt, or you can use the project files included here. Once we're done, we'll have a game-res creature model with UVs. Let's begin by learning to decimate our sculpt for use when baking maps and retopologizing meshes. So here we are in ZBrush. As I said, if you've gone through the concept sculpting course, you can use the sculpt that you have. Otherwise, you can use creature start, which is included with the project files for this course. This file will be very similar to the result of our concept sculpt, although there might be some slight differences with some of the pieces. So let's start by taking a look at how many polygons we're talking about here with our sculpted mesh. So right now we're working with about 36 million, about 35.5 million polygons for the total number of polygons here. Now that includes a lot of polygons that are hidden, things like polygons of the body that are underneath the jumpsuit, things like that. And there are really too many polygons for us to be able to take this out and use. And the whole point of creating this mesh in this initial lesson is to get something that looks like we want it to look, but has a low enough poly count where we can readily use it in an application like Maya without having any issues. And so our job is to reduce the poly count, but keep the visual fidelity. The good thing though is that we don't have to worry about topology. All we care about is that it looks right and it has a low enough poly count that we can use it. We don't have to worry about animating it, making deformable geometry or anything like that. And so there's actually a great tool in ZBrush that will allow us to do this. And so we're going to go up to Z plugin and we're going to open up Decimation Master. Now it's real kind of straightforward going through this. There's a number 1 section, 2, and 3. And so you can go through this 1, 2, 3, follow along with the steps and be able to decimate your mesh. In the first section, options, you've got freeze borders, keep UVs, use and keep poly paint. Well, we don't have any poly paint, so we don't need to worry about that. We don't actually have or need UVs on this version because this is going to be our source. We'll definitely want UVs on our target meshes, but we don't need UVs for this. The borders are going to be any open portions of the geometry. If you have Dynameshes that you're doing this on, they're not going to have open borders, but some of your geometry might. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. That'll make sure that those borders don't move. And then we're going to go down to section 2. Now, basically you can decimate per subtool or you can decimate everything at once. This pre-processing step isn't the decimation step. It's not going to damage anything to process all or current. And so I'm going to go ahead and just pre-process all of the subtools. And so that's going to go through all the visible subtools and create a cache file that is going to be used to actually do the decimation. So like I said, nothing is happening. This cache files are being created. And this could take a little bit longer. It will definitely take longer than the decimation itself. So I'm going to go ahead and hit pre-process all, and it's going to go through all of those subtools, making those cache files. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run, maybe pause the video and come back as soon as this pre-processing part is done. All right, that didn't take too long. So nothing has changed on the model or the geometry, but now ZBrush has sort of a guide on how to deal with the different subtools when it actually comes to decimation. So when we come up to Z plugin and go down to Decimation Master, we can now come down to section 3, Decimate. This is where we're actually going to be changing the poly count. And so we can do this on all the subtools at once, or again, we can do this on one at a time. Just because we did the pre-processing on all of them doesn't mean we have to now decimate on all of them. We could choose to do one at a time. And that could be wise because the number that would be good for one piece of geometry may not work exactly the way that you want for another piece. But I think the default of 20% is actually not going to reduce it. It seems like a big number, but visually it's not going to make that much of a difference. And so I think for the 20% initial decimation, we can go ahead and just decimate all. There are also presets down here, and you can also set a custom number, which you can try to get close to. Same thing up here. And so we'll just leave it on 20%, and we're going to hit decimate all. And I want you to take a look not only visually at the amount of detail on here that we can see. So looking at kind of some of the smaller details on the head and on the cowl, And then if we go into polyframe, you can see how dense some of these pieces are. And so what we're going to do is decimate at 20%. And this is 20% of the whole. We're not taking it down by 20%. We're actually taking it down to 20%. And so you can see here we're at about 35.5 million. Let's see where we are, a total number of points. Let's see where we are after. Okay, we'll go ahead and say decimate all. And this should actually go pretty quickly because of that cache file. So you can see it kind of going through all of the pieces. All right, now it's done. If you look up here, you can see, wow, our total points are now down to 8.5 million. So if you look on each of these subtools, you can see, okay, this one's down to 1.7 million, and then these are down. And so you can take a look across all of these pieces, and some of these pieces will take better to decimation. A lot of times, if you have organic pieces, those can handle decimation a lot better than something that's more of like a hard surface piece. And so some of these pieces you can come in and actually decimate further. For instance, if we grabbed this piece, we looked at that, we may be able to take this down, and you can go back in and say, okay, now I'm going to set this to 10%. And it's not 10% of the 20%, it's actually 10% of the total. And so we'll say decimate current. And that's only going to decimate that particular mesh. Now we're down to 8 million. So we can go through these different pieces. I'm just hitting Alt and clicking on the different subtools. Here you can see this might be a good spot to be able to reduce this cowl. And so we'll decimate the cowl a little bit more. I'll get rid of that mask. Let's come up to the head and see where we're at on the head. So let's reduce the head a little bit. Take this down to 10. Again, decimate current. Okay, we're down to 6 million. It still looks pretty good. Let's take the body because a lot of the body is actually hidden. And so I'm going to go 10% on the body as well. And then we can come in here and check some of these other pieces that are listed under the clothes section. We've got a folder here that has some of these pieces in it. Yeah, I think the belt can really be reduced. Let's go 5% on the belt. Again, make sure that you still have clean lines there, which we do. But you can see that you can really tell the difference and see how you still have the lines, but now you can really see the open areas, whereas some of these other pieces are a little bit more dense. You can see how much denser that is. And so we could come in here, take our hip pieces, and we'll do the same thing at 10%, or 5% rather. You can always go back if it takes it down to where you start losing detail. Okay, let's take a look at our buckle and see what's going on there, because there's a lot of modeled detail in that. It's at about 80,000, which seems like a lot. Let's take a look at the polyframe. We can probably reduce that a bit more. Let's start with 10. And we'll go down to 5 on that. Now, some of these pieces you'll notice have kind of lost a little bit, and some of them it's fine because we're going to actually use geometry from Maya. So for instance, these hooks, you can see that we've really taken out too much of the geometry. So I'm actually going to get rid of both of these hooks, because those are pieces that all we need to do is have the Maya version of that, the low res version, because we didn't do any sculpting on it. And same thing on these. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these. And the hinges as well. Go ahead and delete those. Anything that we have in Maya, which we do, and we'll have the project files for you, but when you created this in the last course, these were pieces that we built in Maya. And we didn't do any sculpting on them. Whereas some of these pieces we built in Maya, and then we created, this entire sculpt. So we'll definitely need to get those out. Let's check our big tooth up here. Pretty good. It's at about, 17,000. So we're down to a little under 6 million. And so feel free to keep going, get it a little bit lower. You can save this file, but I want to show you how we can export our geometry once we're ready to import that into another application. So there's lots of different ways we can do this. Now, we will eventually want to have different OBJ files for all of these pieces because of the way that we're going to bake the maps. So for instance, on the body, we'll want some of these OBJs included in the bake and some of them not. So we want to have the option to use, the jumpsuit and the body, but not the cowl and not the medallion. And so we don't necessarily want everything together for the baking part of it. When we bring it into Maya, though, we can separate things out however we want to. But I'm going to show you a few ways you can export. So you could export individually. So we could take, for instance, the body, come down to export, and I would turn off groups, subgroups here. And this doesn't matter because the mesh is triangulated already. So we could do either way. But you want to make sure that groups is turned off. And then you would just go to export, and you could export that as an OBJ file. And then you'd go through the subtools and export them as such. We can also do that from Maya as well. So let's just export this as one model just so we can kind of speed things up. So let's go to Z plugin. I'm going to minimize decimation master there. And then we're going to go down to FBX export/import. And you can see we can choose selected subtool, visible subtools, all subtools. So we'll choose visible, and you can choose to use the 2019 FBX if you need to. You can also choose whether it's a binary or ASCII. Triangles, if you want to include layers as blend shapes. We do want to make sure this says Maya Y up. That's the way we want to export it. This isn't a button that gets highlighted. If you click it, it'll actually change to a different orientation. So Marmoset, Unity, Motion Builder, OpenGL, DirectX, Lightwave, and then back to Maya up. So it's kind of a toggle through those choices. We don't have any maps to worry about. Smooth the normals. We can also come down to options, and we can see if we want to treat the polygroups as selection sets and things like that. We're going to go ahead and leave all those off. We don't need the cameras, and we'll just hit export. So I'm going to save this in the ZBrush files folder, and we'll just call this creature decimated.fbx, and we'll save that. All right, so now let's jump over to Maya. So once we got Maya open, we need to import our FBX. Let's go to File, Import, navigate to our files, and we're going to choose creature decimated.fbx. Go ahead and import that. It may take a minute. There's a lot of geometry in there depending on how far down we decimated it. All right, I'm going to hit A so we can see everything, kind of see what's in here. I'm going to go ahead and grab all of my geometry. You can see how it all came in separately, even though we did export it as one file, so this is good. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control G to group that together. I'm going to call this creature high, and let's make a layer for it. So with it selected, I'm going to come in and create a new layer. We'll call this creature high layer. Go ahead and save that. And now we can turn this layer so that we can't select the geometry, which is what we want. So I'm just going to change this to a reference. And now it's in our scene. We can see it, but we can't select it. So for right now, this is going to serve as a template to build the rest of our geometry on top of. And so this is going to be our sort of decimated version. And then we'll have a version that's going to contain our actual production geometry. In addition, we can use these pieces to actually bake maps in the next course where we go through texture creation. So we'll use the high-res pieces that we output here to actually calculate the maps in Substance Painter. But for right now, this is going to be used to create our new geometry. So we'll go ahead and we can save this file. And then in the next lesson, we're ready to go in and start creating some new pieces. So some new pieces we can start in ZBrush and do some things to those and output those. Sometimes we can start in Maya. So in the next clip, we'll go ahead and start creating our production geometry. Let's start by creating some new topology for the body. Okay, so this is O2 start, and I'll explain what is in this file. You can open this file or you can assemble your own from the geometry that you're using. So what we've got here is the decimated mesh that we exported in the last lesson. I've got this here as bird creature high. You can see it there. And then I also have this close group. This is basically all of the geometry from the very first course where we built the initial pieces that we took into ZBrush. So if you have those around, you can grab those and bring those in. Any of the pieces, the clothing pieces that you built in Maya and then took back to ZBrush to create the sculpt. Otherwise, you can use this start file as well. Okay, so I've got the high res, and then I've just got the raw geometry that I used to build the clothing in that initial first course. And we'll see how we can use that a little bit later. So in this first lesson, we need to figure out what we're going to make one piece. So for me, the jumpsuit is very skin tight, right? And we've got the body here. So what I've done is gone ahead and combined those objects into one mesh. If we look under bird creature, you can see this body high. So if yours are separated, all you have to do is select each one, go to mesh, and combine to combine those into one object. That way I can come in, take the clothes, hide the clothes, go ahead and I'll hide the horns and the head. And if we look at this, we can actually make this one piece very, very easily. You can see we do have divisions of where the skin versus the clothing is, but it's so small that we'll be able to do that with geometry. And so we can make one seamless mesh out of this. Even though the materials will be different, we can separate that out and it won't be a problem. You can see here I have the sash in here as well. So we're able to combine a lot of different pieces into this one mesh. So how do we create the low-res geometry using the high-res mesh? We can use something called retopology or retopo, and it's very easy in Maya. The one thing that you want to have when you do this is you want to have something for the geometry, the new geometry, to stick to. And the way that you do that in Maya is you click on your geometry, in this case our body high, and we're going to go to modify, and we're going to go down to make live. Okay, you can see this also highlights this little magnet right here, and you can see the geometry listed right in this box. So if I turn this off, you can see it's not live, or I can click that and turn it back on. So now our geometry is live, meaning that the tools that we're going to use are going to enable us to stick to the geometry. So let's change our interface up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and over by the channel box, I'm going to click on the next tab down, the modeling toolkit, and I want to use quad draw. Now you can see at the top under transform constraint, the live surface is selected. You can also see that we have symmetry turned on. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And when we create our initial geometry, I'm only going to create half, and then we're going to duplicate it over to the other side. The reason for that is that it's going to be maybe a little bit asymmetrical up here. The most part is going to be symmetrical, but I just like to have it isolated to one side. It makes me feel a little bit better knowing that I only have a few polygons to think about at the moment. Turn on quad draw. There are a lot of different options for quad draw, but let's just look at the basics. So I'm going to come in here and start to click on our object. And you can see it leaves little green dots. If I make 4 of those and then I hold down shift while I'm hovering over it, I can click to create a polygon. If I click 2 more dots and hold down shift, I can very quickly start to assemble some geometry. And the nice thing is, it's stuck right to the high-res geometry. So what I will do is go in, and I want to make sure to put edges where we have divisions here. So I want to still be able to see the edge for this. And so you can see, I'm actually seeing that change in elevation there. So I'll make sure to put an edge right around the lip of this. And then we can grab, and if we want to move these, we can just grab and move them. And again, shift will help you go in and make a new polygon. Okay, now I want to set some expectations here. Our topology is never going to match exactly. And it's going to be really tedious for you to watch me click every single point because we're going to be doing a lot of retopo in this. And so I'm going to kind of show you the areas that I want to do and kind of show you how I would tackle it, and then let you kind of fill in the gaps. It'll be okay because the way that Substance Painter works, it's not going to require us to have the same geometry and the same UVs, but I want to be able to show you how to do it, even though yours might not match mine exactly. That's totally fine. So let's go ahead and we'll split this body up into a few lessons. I'm going to go ahead and start with maybe the top. And so I would, kind of come through here, and I would leave the areas that you're not sure of until later. You're going to see areas that make complete sense. Like, okay, I know I want to make a rim around this area, or, I know that I want to have points coming around like this. And so you can come in and start to build that. Now, if you actually add something that you don't like, for instance, let's say I actually don't want that in here, you can hold down Control and Shift and click on that to get rid of it. We could do the same thing on an individual point. So this is a really nice flexible way of adding geometry. You can see I can grab this and move it. I don't have to worry about moving it off of the surface. It's always going to be snapped to the surface. So I can just slide it around wherever I want it. And the key with this is to get the silhouette, right? So it doesn't matter as much out here what this looks like. It matters more that you're able to get the silhouette, because as a game res object, you're going to be able to get this stuff on a map, but we're not going to have displacement maps to work with. So we need to make sure to get our silhouette in the geometry. So make sure that you have the height here. And you do that just making sure you have some points down at the bottom and then some points at the top to make sure you get that silhouette. Okay, and you can come around here and kind of fill that in. And eventually you'll work your way back over here and connect up with this area right here. Okay, if you have a curvature and you have a really long polygon, you're going to tend to lose that. And so you just want to make sure that, you get to the high points and the low points, that you're able to get that curvature in there. Now in areas like this, where you can see that this geometry is wanting to flow down the body, but this one kind of wants to flow this way, that's where we can start to make some decisions. So you could come in and fill that in, and you can see that starts to give us a triangle right here. So, if you put these in like that, that starts to give you this open area, which you can then fill in. Now, if you don't want to have that in there, there are other ways that we can flow that geometry in. Okay, we could come in here and start flowing it down this way. Again, knowing that I want to keep one point right along that edge. Start coming down the arm here. I know I want some points up here, so we can start, adding those points in here. There's probably one between there. We can start to fill that in. And as you go, you'll just start to sort of fill these main areas in. And you definitely have the flexibility to go in and delete those, if it's not working for you. Okay. Now we can also come in here and add lines. And so for instance, if this was too wide, we added polygons too far apart and we actually figured out, I needed a line in there. You can hold down Control to add a new edge loop in there, and then it'll just add it right in. If you hold down Tab, you can extrude an edge out. Okay. And you can see if I extrude this out, if I go close to that one, it'll actually pop it right to it. There are actually a lot of different options. If you open up this keyboard mouse shortcuts, there's a ton of different things that you can do with Quad Draw. So while you're in this tool, you're able to do a ton of different things in terms of adding geometry. For the most part, I actually like coming in and just doing it manually. It's kind of relaxing. You have complete control over the placement of all of your points, constantly move things around. Now you can also come in with the Shift key and you can relax your points. So kind of spreads them out a little bit. Gives you a little bit more of a cleaner look. Okay, so I'm just come in and kind of fill this out. Coming up to the top of the collar there. And again, don't go past the midpoint. So I would stay, to the right of this point, to the right of the point in the front, and start to come in and fill out this chest area. Okay, because this is going to be pretty easy to do in terms of you don't have to do too much decision making. You can kind of, pull this down. There's not going to be too much deformation. But again, on the edges where you see geometry, that's where you'll put your pieces. So you wouldn't necessarily have the edge of this sash hit right in the center of a polygon, because we do want to have a sense that that is a piece that's raised off of the surface a little bit. And then, you can use Tab to kind of bring this out. And if you use Tab with your middle mouse button, it'll extrude the whole thing. So you can kind of bring that out. And then you could fill this in. And once you get going, it can kind of go pretty quick, but don't feel like it has to be perfect. Fill in a bunch of large areas, and then you can go back, take a look at it, see if it's flowing the way that you want it to flow, and then you can change things very, very easily. So you can decide, oh, well, I don't know where I want this to, do I want to flow into this line or the one on the other side? So you can come in here, we can add another edge loop. We could kind of relax everything out. So lots of different options here. So I would say go in for this lesson and just fill in kind of this front, the chest area, come around to the back. So go ahead and bring your topology around to the back. Again, we're not doing anything different. It's exact same, just clicking points and then moving our points around, okay? You want to make sure to define the areas around the openings on the jumpsuit, around here. Remember, only on one side. Same thing for the armband. If you have an armband, some versions don't have that. But if you have that, you can do that. But we'll continue. I'm going to go ahead and finish the kind of the front and